there's these little pockets of work that need to be done, and it's hopefully for people on this call or not on this call, if they come across with profits in the next few years, trying to do anything with them in terms of pension schemes, then hopefully they can look back at this and think, right, this is what I just need to do on with profits, and I don't need to get lost down some of these rabbit holes. Um, and I'll probably cover that for the first half of the session, and happy to take questions at any point. But then I'm really happy as well in the second half to basically talk about ideas for doing things better in the industry, CDC, all the with profit type things that are out there. Just have a bit of a brainstorm, some questions, and my thoughts on it. Happy to do all that. So really, there's coming to the first point again, I do get a little bit frustrated when I talk about some of the problems with consolidation, because working in small schemes for over 30 years now, there are quite a lot of small schemes, I think, that just won't be able to easily consolidate. And my point is we need to come up with solutions for them. And so I do bring up some of these problems, not because I'm against consolidation, because I know that small schemes will need solutions. And quite often what will get thrown back at me for people who haven't worked with small schemes is, oh, well, small schemes will just consolidate them. And so what you'll have is a long tail of small schemes that can't consolidate with no solutions. So I just want to get that out of the way. That's sort of the background. And in my career, I've come across with big with profit books, and I'm talking a book of say 70 to 80 defined benefit pension schemes being run in a very different way because they're all invested in a with profits way, probably about 4 or 5 times, including about 3 weeks ago. So this isn't an issue that's gone away. These schemes are run in very different ways. Just as an example is, you might have a consultancy that has all its investment actuarial the book, and then they might have like in an office in the southwest a team of 10 people that all they run the insurer's wholly insured book of 70 or 80 schemes. And legislation has been quite kind to those schemes. So those schemes, if they're less than 100 members, they don't need a SIP. And if they're wholly insured, they don't need a SIP. So you could have a 1,500 life scheme, which is invested in an insurance company arrangement where the insurance company provides the actuarial, which might be subcontracted to a consultancy. The insurance company is in charge of all the investment as it is with profits, and the trustees have no say. You don't need a SIP for that one either. The other item, which means it's quite hard to get information on these policies and pensions, is because every scheme with more than one member has to do a scheme return. But in the scheme return, they ask for the breakthrough with profits policies. So there's no collection of data as in which schemes are in with profit policies in the pension scheme return. So you can't even look in the payable book to see what the breakdown is. The only information you can get is whole scale industry information. So Barnett Woodland do a good survey, and they reported that towards the end of last year, there were 76 with profit funds out there, 24 insurers, 240 billion of assets. That isn't all going to be pensions, but there's, I reckon there's a few billion of pensions in there from these pockets of with profits that are run on a wholly insured basis, on a very efficient fee basis, but with no requirement to do SIPs or ESG or all this stuff. They just run as little actuarial teams running off these policies till they get to retirement. And like I say, I've come across quite a number of them in the last 20, 30 years, and came across one 3 weeks ago. I know that the insurers are getting a bit more interested now in looking at these books and getting them sorted out, and maybe getting trustees on boards and things like this. And the issue is, if you're going to get into any of these schemes with profit, it's much better to go in with your eyes open. So with profits themselves there's some debate as to whether they started in the 1700s with Equitable Life, or they started in the 1800s with Provident Life. No one can really decide which one was first. There's a bit of an argument there, but they definitely started right at the start of actuarial work. And the techniques used for with profits were some of the techniques that led to the very first actuaries. So this isn't a new thing. This is a really old, established approach to managing assets. And it's basically managed on a share of assets basis. So a typical with profit fund will have two pools of assets. They'll have what's called the asset share. So they've offered benefits to the individual. This might be a pension, it might be a life insurance policy, and they've said they'll probably declare these bonuses, and what they'll usually do is declare some regular bonuses every year, and then apply at the very end the bonus, which is usually called the terminal bonus. And they try to run the investment strategies so that over time they can pay these fixed bonuses. And then at the end, whatever's left over, so they're doing it prudently, they don't pay out everything that comes from the investments, and at the end they can just pay out what's left. And that the asset share is effectively which assets they have back in that arrangement. But then they have surplus assets, which are then there for things like if things go wrong, for new business strain, for meeting expenses. And it's quite interesting. They'll run the asset share ones, the ones back in the policy, a lot different than the ones on the surplus. Sorry, someone asking a question. It's a bit muted.
No, sorry. I think it's sorted. Bobby, sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So they'll run those two bases, and they tend. I used to value these. I used to actually declare these bonuses and recommend them to the chief actuary. The underlying asset mix is effectively run to achieve a broad level of return over 10, 15, 20, 25-year time horizons. Unless things go significantly bad, significantly south, they won't eat into these other assets to be able to run it all with the asset share, with the main pool of assets. And I worked in a relatively simple insurer that only had one with profit fund. Some of those, quite a lot of those 24 insurers I mentioned earlier, they will have multiple with profit funds and they'll have multiple with profit series. I worked in a relatively simple insurer. When we came to declare the bonuses for that insurer, we actually did quite a lot of smoothing. So first thing you smoothed was generations. So you looked at what you'd paid out for those policies over the last 10 years. Second thing you smoothed was across. So you smoothed across policies at different time periods. So 5-year policies, 10-year policies, 15-year policies, 20-year policies. You then smoothed if you had slightly different types of policies. So some were taxed and some weren't taxed. And you ended up with a very complicated formula. It gave you an exact bonus for each redemption in each time. And then you applied some, I'd say, actuarial magic. So you actually made it smooth then. So you applied what were called graduation techniques. If anyone ever did the actual exam number 6, they're in there. You basically did some mathematical smoothing, but then you made it actually look okay. And the very final part that was put on there was if any of these impacted any annuity rates, you'd go and look at the annuity tables and you'd see where you wanted to actually be in the annuity table. And the place I worked just wanted to be mid-table, didn't want to be top, didn't want to be bottom.
I mean, I mean, I'd argue all actuarial was magic, but in terms of the smoothing, it was what smoothing can get quite a bad name, can't it? In terms of just sort of trying to give you an averagey type answer. Did that sort of help in terms of the returns that the funds were getting, or was it just literally to kind of average out what was going on a year-by-year basis.
So this is where it's quite interesting. If you then go into unit link techniques and look at daily priced assets, etc., it's so far away from that you wouldn't even think from first principles it was the way you would do it. The reason I haven't discussed investment return is because all that smoothing was done excluding looking at anything that happened to the assets. You basically worked on the basis that the long-term bonus rates you'd set, these fixed bonus rates you set, were still appropriate given the return that you were basically getting on your assets. And the final bonus you paid, you didn't want to be significantly different than what you paid last year. And as long as the assets allowed you to do that, that's what you did. Which is why you generally never get a market value adjuster at retirement for, or at the end of a policy for a with profit policy. They generally aim to be able to give you that return they think they can get from those assets and that strategy over the term of the policy. And there's a lot of importance paid on that final value that you pay. So the checking whether the investments did well is a second order thing. Investments are sort of run separately, and as long as they genuinely are giving you the ability to pay your fixed bonuses and then to not have to completely decimate your terminal bonus, then you're okay.
Cool, thank you. There's been quite a lot of talk in the chat about equitable life with profit policies and what happened to those. So thank you, John, for the question, and for Billy and Peter for discussing it. And Peter's view is that he thinks they're all fully paid up by now. Did you have any comment on the equitable life kind of with profits issue, Bobby?
Yeah. So equitable life. And when it started, when I worked in the insurer, we had some suspicions about equitable life because I talked about annuity tables. I talked about league tables. They tended to be top of the league tables all the time, and we couldn't figure out quite how they were doing it. Suspected they were having an expense load and which was lower than everybody else, and I think that's what turned out to be the case. They underestimated their expenses, or they thought they could get away with cheaper expenses, or they thought they could outperform and get enough business by being top of the tables that their new business strain wouldn't be as much. It just didn't quite fit quite right why they could always be top of the league tables. So in put another way, I wasn't surprised when Equitable Life happened that it was Equitable Life from working in life insurance in the early 90s.
Billy's had a question. He's talked about the precipice risk of removing the final bonus and the value falling off a cliff. And he said that he knows modern day smooth return funds do not have this bonus structure, but asked, do any of the with profits you are involved with have this final bonus risk?
Yeah, so that goes back to my earlier point as to when these came into existence, and they work if you've got a steady flow of policies that have been going for ages. So I was using in the 90s rate books going back to 1920. So we had people maturing policies maturing from people that started them in 1920, and we were having a steady flow of new business. So if you cut off the new business and you start moving into some sort of end game analysis with profits, then that will increasingly become a risk. But it worked. The regular bonuses, the final bonus work when you've got a steady flow of business, you've got a spread of redemption dates, of terms of policies, and you've got a spread of ages of people when they took these policies out. If you're going for retirement ones, then you're effectively aiming for maturing at similar age. But yeah, if you lose any of the fluidity of the fund, that's when these risks can start to come in quite a bit bigger. So if you're talking about some of the new things like CDC, they need two things. They need a regular flow of business and a regular spread of risks if they're generally going to spread these risks. but they also need these extra assets to be able to absorb any downturns. The extra assets that insurers have with profits are quite significant. It's not like 1%, 2% on top of the pot. It's a decent amount. They have to have a solvency margin, and I can't remember what the exact solvency margins are today, but they have significant assets in these extra assets, and they invest them very differently. So I just looked at a chart before, and the average extra other assets pot has something like 35% in cash, whereas the main policy is tend to be split around 70% in either equities and property and corporate bonds, and then about 30% in gilts and cash. Yeah, Ian.
Yeah, morning, Bobby. I was just going to say I started my career at General Accident Life, and we did very well on with profits. And I recall that the free asset ratio, as we called it, was a real point of competition, because the argument was that the higher the ratio of free assets to assets that had liabilities matching them gave you a freer hand in terms of investment, because you weren't actually matching liabilities with some of the investments that you had. And that was one of the things that spooked me about Equitable Life, actually, because I think they look quite poor on that analysis. So I actually, when I left General Accident, I set up the With Profits Bond shop. So got really, really involved in kind of retail with profits. But yeah, that was a really, really important point, and something that we looked at very keenly when we were analysing bonds in the markets about what that free asset ratio was.
Yeah, very good point. And you don't hear much of that being talked about at CDC. Well, I haven't either. I haven't seen it much talked about in terms of the free assets. In fact, when I did push one of the CDC funds, they hadn't decided what they were going to do if they had a really bad market and had to not pay what they said is guaranteed. Anyway, that is effectively the background, because the main point I really want to get across today, if I can only get across one point, is don't waste time looking at asking questions on with profit policies that are going to give you no value whatsoever if you get involved in having to do any work with the profit policies. Because what all the questions that then get asked if somebody comes across with profit policy for the first time, especially an investment consultant or an actuary, or it's the way the pension scheme return asks about them as well. They ask for things that are not going to affect the policy, the validity of the policy. If you remember, if you understand that it's all aimed towards that final maturity. Most of these pension schemes that have with profits will be aiming towards the retirement date. There's very, very few circumstances you want to surrender that policy. If you want to wind the scheme up or something, then you're going to need to surrender the policy, or assign the policy to the individual. That might be a way to do it. But you don't have a daily price product that is daily risk priced either. So asking for things like, first of all, the asset allocation underlying the fund. You probably won't be told that. I think nowadays you probably will, but the relevance to the actual value of your policy is second order at best, maybe even third order, if these are policies which are being run and still offered. And I think there will be still insurers that won't necessarily give you the asset value or give you the actual asset value for the policy that you're in. At CIS, where I worked in the early 90s, we had the same assets across all our policies, not just our with profit policies. The only ones with the annuities we had to match, but apart from annuities, everything else used the same general pool of assets.
There's a question from John, Bobby.
Yeah. I haven't seen.
Good morning. Yes. So a few points. I mean, you've got mutuality versus proprietary. You've clearly got which are 100, 0, 90, 10. Some are all the profits go back to the policyholders. The free asset ratio is a forerunner to Solvency UK Solvency 2. So Solvency 2 is now what's used. So we now at least have somewhat of a standardization in that space. Broadly, it's very hard to compare across insurers because the implicit guarantees and benefits being provided are significantly different, not just a mix. It's so comparing simple ratios is I mean, it really doesn't tell anything. That's what I would say. But I mean, deep down, Bobby, what you're really saying is you had to build a very complex mark-to-model system to work out what you should allocate based upon a mark-to-market assets. Very, very complicated.
Yeah, most of the original idea for this one today, and the one will be more useful practically to people, is when you're coming to work on some of these significant pools of wholly insured schemes that are sitting in these different buckets around the industry. And I am aware that people are starting to have to do work on these buckets, and they will generally be a with-profit policy per member or a with-profit policy with all the members assigned. So there won't be any decisions going on there. So getting for your first big decision is: can we let these policies mature, or do we need to surrender them? If you can let them mature, then you need to get the policy details in terms of the annual bonuses, what the history of the annual bonus has been, and what the history of the terminal bonus has been, to get a reasonable hold on what you're being promised with these policies. But getting the underlying asset allocation, getting the current asset value, getting the current expenses, these are all things which even if you can get them, will
when I was up
not necessarily valid for you. And what tends to happen in my experience is you get consultants involved in looking at these policies, and before you know it, you've spent an absolute fortune on questions that are not going to add any value. And they get frustrated because they're not getting the answers. They used to go into asset manager and saying, "Can you give me the fund value and the asset allocation?" And they get it, and it actually means something. They go to with profits, they might not even get it. They do get it, it'll be really hard to get the right information, and then it won't be up to date, and it'll be like last 6 months ago. If you're lucky, it might be 12 months ago. And they just get the knickers in, twist about something, just and take up loads of fees. And you're talking these banks of business tend to have 70 schemes run on a very simple basis with no SIPs, with no big advisor fees, and you can very quickly, if you get the wrong consultant or the wrong trustee in there who doesn't know about these with profit policies, you're just going to soak up fees, and that's what you're going to do. And
so I have a supplementary question for you, Bobby. So when I was working at Insure, I converted 250 DB schemes from with profits overnight. And we did it on a full asset share. And we did it for all the reasons you're saying, which was the one at a time questions and complications meant that the advisory industry wasn't ready to cope with these one at a time. And the question I have for you is, do you think that it's worth trying to drum up an approach whereby the insurers are encouraged to convert the DB with profit schemes? I'm not talking about individual with profit policies to individual members.
Yeah,
to convert those on a full asset share because of the complications and the cost of dealing them one at a time.
Yes. So I was going to say, well done first. That is a really good solution, but it has to be at insurance level, the insurer's level. And again, as you can see, so just another example there, the questions to ask that are nothing to do with the individual policies. You've got to go and have a proper conversation with the insurer, understanding what it is. Not only do I think it's worth it, it is actually happening. And it's one of the conversation that I had about 3 or 4 weeks ago is what led me to want to do this session, because I was aware those conversations were starting to kick off now. So yeah, so it's and as long as you're doing full asset share, so basically as long as you're not ripping the policyholders off, then you can come up with a very transparent, good basis then, and maybe schemes could consolidate on that basis.
Yep.
But if you don't convert the with profit policies, then you're not going to be able to do that. But I think the books I'm aware of business are big enough to have those conversations as a whole on the book, rather than trying to work individually with an individual scheme in this state. If you come across an individual DB pension scheme that doesn't seem to be in one of these arrangements, then I'd encourage you to speak to the insurer and see where their other books lie, and try to get them involved in an overall conversation, rather than to do something specific with that with profit policy.
Thanks, Bobby. And Billy's got a question for you.
Oh, hello. As you know, I'm not an actuary. I'm just a thicky financial advisor. I do wonder whether there's a communication problem with profits. The whole learning about the equitable life saga was that people understood that bonuses, could go up and down, but they didn't understand the final bonus, and obviously the equitable life circumstances were quite different. But it's reared its head again in 2020 with the pandemic. The Proof Fund had a significant bonus cut. And I, no disrespect, but I think a lot of advisors got caught with their trousers down, because the message to clients was that with profits could only sort of go one way, and we know that it's not the case. So my question is, what do you think we can do to improve the communication of with profits to the end user, to the policyholders, the individual clients?
So again, come to the book I was originally talking about, the DB pensions. I think there's quite a lot that can be done there. If you talk about individuals, then I think it's just some of these examples as to what's happened in the past. Well, the thing that really hurt with profits in the 90s was we had fixed bonuses at 5%, 6%. 5% in your first year. If you had the benefit that had been there for 2 years, you got 6%, and that was fixed. And you have the terminal bonus on top of that. So when gilt yields plummeted, that just wasn't appropriate anymore. I think if we're going to go into a time of higher long-term rates, then you might be able to get some slightly better fixed bonuses than have been there for the last 10, 15 years. But I think you need to go into these sort of arrangements with your eyes open, and need to understand. And there's plenty of examples where with profits haven't paid out. So I think if we can get them out, but the problem is insurers who are selling with profits don't tend to show what the bad outcomes are. They've been required to by legislation since the early 90s. But effectively what that's turned into is just disclosure upon disclosure upon disclosure upon disclosure. And the first ones that came out in terms of the money purchase illustrations, well, not money, I'm sorry, money purchase again, the with profit illustrations in the 90s, they were just seen as a report you had to do. They weren't actually seen as a valuable report that gave valuable information to members. So I think the FCA I think the PRA has been told to look at disclosures again. But if the life insurance disclosure are anything like the pension fund disclosures, we basically need to rip them all up and start again, and actually say what's actually is valuable to members. I'm 55 next month, and I've got information in terms of how to take some cash out of my pension, and I just couldn't follow it all. And I'm an actuary who's been working in the industry for 30 years and in the pensions industry. I just got sent 20 documents in a big email which said, please see attached.
Can you name the provider, Bobby?
Sorry.
So can you name the provider?
No. No. The provider actually has got a really good online system. It's just getting information sent. Somebody hasn't looked at the email and decided to put an email out which actually has something which actually makes some sense. They basically just sent all the compliance things they have to send in a big attachment of 20 emails. So I think if we get onto communication, I think we probably need to have a few more of these. I mean, that is effectively what I wanted to say about the background with profits, and then going into it, your eyes open. And it's, I think there's, I didn't even pick up on that other point that was just made before, but I think effectively, if you come across it with profits and you have to do any work on it, then just let the alarm bells ring and just think, this is different to unit linked, daily priced investment funds. These are contracts which have end dates and which have terms and conditions, which the investments is second order. Sometimes it's first order when you have the big bonus cuts, but generally the investments is second order. And most of our industry, most of the consulting industry, most of the trustee industry, we think straight away to get the investment information first, because that's key. And for with profits, it isn't key. The contract conditions are key. And so it's different conversations. And I really like the idea of having conversations with the insurers, because I mentioned at the very start that it's very hard to get information on these policies. The one group of people that do have the information on all these policies are those 24 insurers. They know which of their policies are pension policies. They know which of their policies are life insurance policies. They know which of those policies are being run as a group with no statement of investment principles because they're exempt. That information is there, and it's only 24 insurers. So if you try to have individual conversation with these insurers, you're going to struggle. So if you come across any of these schemes which are individualized, try get them into a bigger conversation.
Thanks, Boy. There's a couple more questions in the chat. Peter Cameron Brown said that the comment about terminal bonuses versus new business and free assets probably also has application to DB funds. Do they need to hold free assets to anticipate possible scheme closure?
Surplus. Get used to running surplus, proper surplus. I think, isn't that the conversation we're having now, Peter?
Yes, it's precisely. that was the point that was back in my mind, that we actually should be targeting DB schemes to build and retain surplus rather than distribute it out.
The big difference between insurance and pensions, though, is that you always have a surplus because you have to have a solvency margin. So scheme insurance has been run with solvency margins and surplus as a matter of course, whereas pensions hasn't. So that's the difference. There's never ever been a requirement to run with surplus for a DB pension scheme.
Yes. But the government seems very keen for this surpluses to be distributed.
The government does, but I think the regulators are aware that the surpluses might not persist, and plus, not every scheme's got a surplus, and there's no standard definition of what valuation basis a surplus is calculated on. So I think most schemes that are talking about surplus realise that they shouldn't just be looking at the technical provisions on a risky basis. It should be a low risk basis, but even that is not a real surplus if markets go south.
We sort of looked at that and decided that solvency was the only one with external moderation, and then even then we felt we should retain a buffer above that. Yeah.
If you're in a position as you are, Peter, where you've got quite a big surplus, then it makes sense to try and secure a long-term surplus. I think some of the issues around with profits, though, map really nicely into some of the new investment techniques out there. CDC, for example. Again, difference between CDC and with profits. You could say the profit margin, the profit share isn't there, but somebody's going to make some money on CDC, so there must be some profits somewhere. And CDC aren't required to hold the solvency margin. CDC doesn't provide any formal guarantees that have to be guaranteed as they do in the insurance market. So you should have a better chance of actually getting a good return. And I'd say for CDC, the way CDC is designed, the investment return isn't second order. The CDC have been designed on the basis of investing the money to get a better return and converting that into a smooth benefit. That's not how with profits came about. That's not how with profits were run. With profits were run as roughly what can we get from a reasonable investment mix, starting with what the government going to give us on gilts. Then can we smooth everything and run on that general asset mix so that we can pay a certain level of bonuses. It's never been about generating the best return on the assets to provide the best with profit outcome. It's been about providing a reasonable outcome from a long-term asset mix. So it's actually fundamentally come from a different point. So you would expect for CDC, for all those reasons, there to be more volatility. Going back to the example earlier, if the Pru surprised everybody in 2020, then I would be surprised if CDCs didn't surprise somebody at some point when we have a bit of a market downturn.
Yeah, I think the CDC difference is like that sort of spread over the future in terms of the increases rather than current fund values, isn't it? And that's kind of probably why it doesn't need to hold the sort of free assets.
Yeah, and go back to communication. I think the problem with CDC and communication is we don't have history, so we don't have examples. But I think you could certainly take the market conditions from some that have led to some of these with profit bonus cuts and say to CDC providers what would happen in this situation. Is there some scenarios we can show to members that really it's not going to be perfect all the time, and if on the really bad scenario, this is what could actually practically happen.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got 3 hands up now. I'm aware there's a question from John that's been around for a while. So if I read that, then we'll go straight to the hands.
Yeah.
Is there still a market or auction for second-hand policies as an alternative to surrender?
Simple answer is I'm not sure. I think there might be. I think other people are better placed to answer that question for me, but I can have a quick look. Well, I'll answer other questions.
So I think Bob is next.
Yeah. Bobby, you haven't really touched upon underlying guarantees, annuity conversion rates on with-profit policies.
Yeah.
I just wanted to give an example that it can be very, very important. I was involved in a very large with-profit scheme, won't name the insurance company, but well known, where there was an underlying guarantee of annuity conversion rate. And the insurance company, when we wanted to move away the assets into a managed fund, basically said that guarantees didn't apply. And we had to go to Queen's Counsel to actually get the insurance company to agree at great cost that they were wrong, that they had to honour the guarantee and that the cash conversion factors had to be included in the calculation of the underlying asset value. And it made millions of pounds difference in the actual commutation. This is going back to the early 2000s with a very, very well-known insurance company. So you can get ripped off by insurance company actuaries who believe they're cleverer than the odd consultant who may seem to be a very small organisation.
Yeah.
So, yeah, be careful.
Yeah. So apologies, I didn't cover that. I don't think I covered the questions you should ask about with profits. So guarantees are highly first order and quite often they are very attractive. And quite often they haven't been reviewed for a while as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Because they're contractual for when you first take out the policy. It's unfortunate you had to go to council to get them honoured. But yeah, you need to. The questions you do need to get detailed on are the policy conditions.
Yeah. Well, it's very difficult to get the policy conditions out in the first place. And the second problem was that obviously I won't name the insurance company, but they obviously had their pet Queen's Counsel. We had to go long and hard to find somebody, a Queen's Counsel, who understood the technicalities. We had to actually train the counsel as to what the issue was. And in the end, he was exceptionally brilliant, and he did a great job. And literally within a matter of a week or so, fully understood the issue. But you can't go to any old Queen's Counsel and get advice on this because it's such a technical area, and it's so easily to be distracted by the insurance company's actuary or actuarial team saying, "Yeah, we've done this like this for years." It's not an issue, but technically, contractually, it is an issue, and it's a big issue.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like this session to have some highlights as to what people should click to, and they should definitely click to this part, Bob, with that explanation, because there's a lot of non-trivial things you need to understand about with profits. But then it comes to the size of the scheme and the size of the benefit, and again, if you're talking a few £100, then you wouldn't go to council. If you're talking a few £1,000,000, you would. So it's you just need to go into it with your eyes open and understand the questions that we need to ask are different to the questions we go and ask on a index tracking fund or just a normal daily priced fund.
Bobby, what I would add to anybody listening to this who's got that kind of problem or issue, stand your ground. And we only achieved what we achieved because we were capable of actually reading the detail of the policy terms and conditions and understanding the context in which they were written in the probably early 60s or early 50s.
Yeah.
Go back to previous decades, century. And if we hadn't had the knowledge that we had at the time, we would have been browbeaten by the insurance legal team and the insurance actuarial team, and we would have given up, and we would have lost probably £2 or £3 million worth of assets for a pension scheme, which represented maybe 50% of the asset value of the pension scheme.
Yeah. Well done on getting that sorted.
It was a big winner there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But again, even that, I mean, I would probably be able to read that and understand most of it. But I spent my first 6 years as a life insurance actuary dealing with that stuff day in, day out. And it's very hard to teach somebody that, and well done on teaching your counsel to understand the issues and within the case.
He was brilliant. He really was. And we looked long and hard for somebody who could understand the issues, bearing in mind that the insurance company already had somebody that understood the issues. There aren't many people around that can understand it. But there's some brilliant Queen's Counsels around, and you just got to work with the basic facts, and they've got to ask questions, and they've got to be intellectually totally on top of the subject. And we only achieved it because the Queen's Counsel was brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. And you can't be totally generic, but insurance actuaries tend to be very technically good at what they do. And in my career as an insurance actuary, most of the people that were my managers probably never seen a client in their life in a work context. So they're very technically brilliant actuaries who don't necessarily know how to communicate things, but also the circles they move in tend to be the technical life insurance actuarial circles where their technical ability is confirmed by their peers. So they tend to be very hard to move. So I'm not surprised by that, by your scenario there when you're dealing with the insurance actuaries. It's not a bad thing because in terms of running these policies, but it's not set up to be very client friendly or to be very negotiable in those sorts of situations.
Rosalind, you had a question?
I did. And this is going to sound like a loaded question, but it genuinely isn't. You made the point that the insurers who set these policies up, they know what they've got and who they've got and what kind of scheme it is. I don't know much about with profits policies. I'm amazed though how often I've been brought in by companies who've been contacted by an insurer saying, we've got a pension scheme with your name on it that's old and we've no idea who the members are or what the benefits are or what we should do with the money, help. Which is a really quite difficult thing to do from a legal point of view because no one really owns the money. So when you say, oh, these 24 insurers, they know what they've got and who they've got and what kind of policy it is, do you really mean that? I mean, I don't know. Maybe this is an area.
Yeah, I didn't say they have all the detail of the policy to be able to tell you all the answers to the question, but I think you just told me that again, this isn't. I'm being a bit not. They knew they had that scheme and they knew it was a pension scheme. So
Well,
that's all you might get. That's all you might get on some of the older policies.
Sometimes they don't even have that. They say,
yeah.
oh, there's a thing. And I think partly because of the consolidation of insurers, there's an awful lot of stuff that was in the hands of someone else and they don't know it's pensions.
So
they don't really know they don't know who the members are. And so they don't know who holds their policies. So
so I've probably been a bit optimistic.
I just don't know.
So my point was, you can't get it anywhere else. The only place you can get it, if you can get it, is the insurers. And you just highlighted that even that isn't great data. Which again comes back to my reason point for this is if you come across one of these things, don't just think you can ask the same questions you ask about everything else. You need to get somebody involved who knows what's going on these policies. Because otherwise you go down so many rabbit holes and you might not even understand what you've got.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rosalind. And John, you had another question.
Yeah, I think Rosalind's point is very well made, which is that one of the difficulties with legacy also means that, unfortunately, the people who knew about it have often now retired. And so you end up with an expertise gap. And that expertise gap can be viewed as obfuscation and stubbornness. And actually, it's just a lack of knowledge of what was written and why back when. And people can read the documentation, but it's not the same as having lived it. But
they might not even have it. They might not even have the documentation. Some of these really old policies.
Yeah, I've been there many times, unfortunately. And so when people ask a question, you come away and you think that's a good question. Who do I ask? Where do I find the stuff? And it's not easy. Now back to your wider point about though, Bobby, the whole question of with profits in a wider sense and consolidation. Given Rachel Reeves, I believe, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, has said that the DC scheme should aim to be £50 billion, then it's likely that any CD, if the same is applied to any CD scheme, it's likely that many CD schemes are going to end up having to consolidate, because to get to 50 billion is a hard task, unless there's some other form of compulsion that gets them to grow. And I think the points you're raising around mark to model and how you ensure fairness are absolutely valid if we can see that there's potential for greater consolidation in the future, and we should plan for that runoff and whatever we build, is what I think, is my personal view. Or at least the philosophies behind it, maybe not the detail, the principles behind it.
Yeah. I take the high level messages of the amount of consolidation, etc., with a pinch of salt, because I think as long as the CDC scheme's been set up on a reasonable basis, that even some of the master trusts, some of the really good owned master trusts, I would be surprised if they were actually forced to consolidate. Because there's just so much frictional cost involved in consolidating these things, and if they run well and they are providing value for members, then I'd be surprised if a blanket size value was used to force schemes to consolidate. But yeah, I wouldn't plan for consolidation. I mean, this is consolidation problems part one. I think there's so many different issues in the pension scheme marketplace where there'd be so much value lost if schemes are forced to consolidate. And in some areas, you'll have actually nobody with any commercial interest to consolidate a group of schemes because they're so small and they haven't got budgets, and who's actually going to then go in and do that? I am a fan of consolidation to some extent because it will lead to efficiencies, but I think it'll only be 10 to 20% if we're lucky of the industry. And we should still look to make sure that for the smaller schemes that aren't going to consolidate, like schemes in the with profit bucket, that we provide for them, and we don't just write them off as too small and they should just be consolidated.
Okay, it's just that that's the stated policy, isn't it? And whether I'm with you on that I'm not sure, but it is the stated policy.
It's an interesting position for CDC schemes as well, isn't it? Given they're starting, like, to get to scale, it's going to take a long time, isn't it? I definitely see value in planning for what consolidation would look like in the future.
Yeah, but the stated policy is to get more schemes invested in UK. The regulator's latest report last week on the funding of schemes told schemes to be careful with the surplus, with their investments. They shouldn't be taking too much risk. The covenant regulations that are now being imposed onto schemes are saying you were taking too much risk in the past. Given the covenant of your employer, you need to tone down risk. So I'll take the overall messages with a little bit of a pinch of salt.
Thank you.
Let me have the question for Bryn Davis.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Sorry, mic's not on. I thought Rosalind was next. But still, I can't resist.
I'm not. If someone can put my hand down, that would be great, because it's refusing to allow me to.
Yeah. Okay. I can't resist making a comment. I started in the Legal and General Life Admin Department doing surrenders and loans, which is a poor place to start because by and large you get a lot of the rubbish policies that probably should never have been sold. But I bought the concept of with profits. No one's touched on with profits endowments and what happened there. It's a nice, interesting walk down memory lane. Since I've seen the light, a with profit policy is a very weird thing to buy. Because you're giving some third party or second party a lot of money and saying, okay, I trust you, depending on what some employee of that institution thinks I should get at some stage in the future. There was a lot of propaganda about how this would always work. Well, these things work till they don't work. I just wonder whether there's a history to sort out, but if this approach is going to be used in the future, I think we need a different name. To me, with profits is it's a brand which has lost its luster, some old way of thinking. And I was quite concerned about the discussion about the extent to which profit looks like CDC. CDC's got to be more robust than classic with profits. So
yeah, my view, and you've touched on it a bit there, though, is that if you put with profits and CDC side by side, and you look at the issues that led to with profits getting a bad name, you can hardly separate them on those issues. The issues that separate them are nothing to do with what got with profits a bad name. The issues that separate them are to do with the pricing of guarantees, the solvency margin that CDC isn't required to have, everything else, and the profits share. Everything else pretty much looks the same to me.
think
what would I know? I just ran with profits policies for 6 years.
I think it's quite good timing because our session next week is on CDCs, and I think we've got a speaker who will be discussing how the CDC in this country has been designed to be robust and to sail through. Sail is probably the wrong word, but to navigate any bumps in the road and markets. And there's been some clever thought as to how that can be achieved via smoothing future increases effectively.
Yeah.
So,
with profits ran very happily from 1800 to 1994, 1995. So if CDC gives us 200 years without any problems, then it'd be a good thing.
Excellent. Sorry, there's a few questions coming through on the chat. I'm aware there's only a couple of minutes left, so I'll try and. So Rebecca said, "Is there ever a strong case, depending on the with profits fund status, maturity, and remaining policyholders, for expecting a significant payout from the surplus as scheme winds down?"
Yes, that was known as orphan assets, and it's a well-trodden path schemes. So there's yes is the answer.
Cool. And Rosalind has just mentioned that in most areas of law, you don't have barristers who really understand the history or are used to the contracts, and we are very lucky with the pensions bar. I think that's a good comment to have. John's mentioned that we need another name other than with profits, and yeah, I think that's a sentiment that's been echoed.
Yeah.
So.
And then I'd separate the second half of this discussion from the first half. The first half is really to just highlight to people that if you come across with profits in your schemes, then make sure you get the right people involved and don't go off down rabbit holes. The second half is about were the techniques applicable for the future, and I think they are. And I don't think we would call it with profits, and we're not calling it with profits at the moment anyway.
And as Billy mentioned, the transparency that's required nowadays would far outstrip what maybe was there before. Thank you. We're at time. Just one last call for any questions.
Can I make a comment? And that is that as a guy who sold a lot of with profits in the 20th century, and I'm not particularly proud of the lack of knowledge I had of what I was selling, I think it's a remarkable session we've had today in helping us to understand how we can do the legacy the right thing, and secondly, how we can make sure we do not allow ourselves to get in the same position again with CDC. So thank you very much indeed, Bobby. And thanks to all the questions. There's some really great questions, ones which I wish I could have asked. I don't know if we have anybody dying to say something before we wrap up. In which case, if I can, on behalf of everybody, thank Tris for hosting this so well, and to everybody on this call for making our lives a lot more sensitive to the issues around with profits. And on that subject, I will do the usual and hope we have peace in the East, peace all over. And most of all, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Cheers.